So how's it start again? Pulikako? Is it?
Yeah, you say pulikako and just start saying it.
Okay, pulikako. Ao heai namaka o kalani. E maliu mai I nei a leo pule. He leo ha'a. A he leo o mai kai no hoi. E malama mai a mako a palekana. A puka I ke ao ma lama lama. A puka.
Thanks. All right, it's all yours, Bob.
Okay, it's all yours, Jen. If you can throw up that one picture. Okay, there it was. I don't know. I'm sorry, you guys. My computer, every time somebody throws it up, it puts me on my desktop, so I just got to start again. Okay, so here we are. These are real simple pictures, but it shows you the different types of rigs that we can run into. And again, there's going to be variations on all of these rigs, but I think what's important is maybe just to look where the mast or mast plural placement are in relation to the hull. So if we start at the upper left, you can see that we have what's called a catboat. Catboat will always have its mast as far forward as possible. It will never have jibs. It will always only have a mainsail. Mainsail, again, is the sail that's behind the mast. We'll see these a lot in smaller boats. Generally, we won't see these in the middle of the ocean, but we'll see them in bays. We'll see them in harbors. Kind of a easy boat to sail. The disadvantage is that because you only have one sail, that one sail is going to be quite large, dependent on the length of the boat, of course. And so it may be a little bit more demanding in terms of handling that big sail. So catboat. The next one we'll see probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 billion of them is a sloop. Very, very common rig. If you look at the mast, it's forward, but it's not so far forward that they can't fly a jib. So most sloops will have a mainsail and they will have a jib sail. This particular drawing is showing a fractional rig, and what that means is that the head stay, and that's the stay that the jib will attach to, doesn't go all the way to the top of the mast. It goes a fraction of the way up the mast, hence the name fractional rig. That doesn't mean that if it goes all the way up to the mast, it's still not a sloop. What defines a sloop is location of the mast in relation to the hull again. Yeah. So sloops can also have actually double head sails if they want to, but again, it's the positioning of the mast. So, and then the next one, I've got people in my thing. So I think it's a cutter rig. And again, if you look at where the mast is in relation to the hull, it's further back. And so the cutter rig will always have 2 head sails. The reason that the cutter rig is real popular is that it allows the sails to become smaller. You can have the same sail area, but you're not having to fight a large main or a large jib like you are on the sloop or the catboat in terms of the main. So a cutter is kind of an interesting way to go. Again, a cutter will only have one mast, just like the sloop and the catboat, but that mast is going to be further back in relation to the entire length of the boat. Lower left, this is called a yawl. For all of you who are from the South, a yawl has 2 masts, and generally the aftermost mast is quite small in relation to the main mast. Main mast will, for the most part, on these types of rigs, always be the taller of the 2 masts, right? The other thing you can note is that the yawl, the mizzen mast, and that's the back mast, is going to be behind the rudder post. If we look at this picture, you can see that the rudder is forward of where the mizzen mast is, right? The idea behind this is that, again, we can have smaller sails, but the mizzen sail is more a balancing sail, if you will, so that we can maybe start reefing the main if we get into stronger winds and keep a jib and the mizzen sail up. So again, a little bit better control perhaps than a sloop. or a cutter. But again, the yawl will have a much smaller mast at the back, and the mast will be behind the rudder post. The next one we'll probably see a lot of is a ketch. Ketch rig is real popular, again, because you can have smaller sails, but have the same total sail area. The ketch rig, the mizzen mast is going to be forward of the rudder post, or the rudder, if you will, and it will still be smaller than the main mast. So you can see on this picture that this ketch has one jib, right, because there's only one head stay coming down. It'll have the mainsail, and that's going to be where the word ketch is written, and then the mizzen sail is going to be behind that. Does that make sense? And then finally, we have the schooner. I think it's a schooner. I can't get rid of you guys that are over here. Anyway, a schooner will have both masts, for the most part, the same height, or the foremast can be shorter than the main mast. Okay, so either on a schooner you will have the mast the same height, or the front mast will be lower. I'm sorry, not slower, lower. And again, the idea behind this is we can decrease the sail area. I'm sorry, we can decrease this area of any sail to make it a little bit easier to work the boats, right? There was some schooners that were built in the Chesapeake, and they had very raked, very angled masts back. And the reason that they did that is they use these for growing oysters and collecting oysters in the Chesapeake Bay, and they would actually use the mast as a crane. And so they needed the mast to be tilted way back so that they could raise up their oyster pots and bring them on board and then dump the oysters and put it back down. Kind of interesting use of sail, because this was all before we had motors. So they had to pick up all these oyster pots or oyster cages, whatever they call them, under sail. And in fact, they still have to do that in Chesapeake Bay. You cannot, as I understand it, you cannot fish for oysters on any type of boat that is not wind propelled, right? So now, just to make it a little bit more complicated, any of these rigs can have a lot more sails forward of the mast. They can have some sails aft of the main mast. There's a lot of different variations. Excuse me. So that's why I want you to just look at the masts, right? The mast can tell you quite easily what type of rig it is. Particularly when we start looking at sloops and cutters, that type of thing, is that from a distance, they may look the same, but you have to try and guess, or not guess, but try and look at where the mast is in relation to the hull, right? A yawl and a ketch can sometimes be a little bit confusing if you can't see the entire boat. But again, if you look at the mast, generally on a yawl, the back mast is going to be much lower in relationship to the main mast. And if you look at the ketch, the mizzen mast is just a bit smaller than the main mast, right? So any questions on this yet?
Good for me. Oh, didn't Mike have a question, Bob? He wanted to know if are they a version of the ketch, or where do they fall?
Yeah, I'll get into that in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there's no questions, we'll go ahead. So now, can anybody tell me what they think Hikianalia's rig is? Very good. It's a schooner, right? Both masts are the same height. Right. Thank you, Patrick. Both masts are the same height. And it has jibs forward of the forwardmost mast. We could call this a double head sail schooner because we can fly two head sails before the front mast. I had some pictures of that. I don't know if we have them. I sent them to John. Yeah, maybe. No, that's not it. That's not it. No, nope. Yeah, I don't have it. Anyway, if you can picture two sails forward of the forwardmost mast, I know most of you, or some of you have sailed the boat like that. We can also fly a head sail from, not a head sail, but we can fly a staysail from the back mast. And there's a picture of that, Jen, the second one down that I see. Yeah. So this is, again, this is Hikianalia. And you can see that she has her main, which are right behind those flags that are flying. And then she has a jib sail, but it's being flown from the aft mast. So this would be called a mizzen staysail. Mizzen staysail, because the big sail behind the back mast is called the mizzen sail. The sail behind the main mast is called the mainsail. And then in this picture, I think we're only flying one jib, but we did some changes in the last dry dock. We've opened up the slot between the two stays that we hank on our jibs, so it'll be quite a bit easier to fly two jibs. Before, it was a real problem to get the jib between the slot created by the head stay, which goes all the way to the top of the mast, and the staysail stay, which goes about 2/3 of the way up. Very, very difficult. We always had to thread it through hard on the sail because it was always getting abraded against the wire. Well, now we've increased that distance, and hopefully it will be a little bit easier to get through. We'll see. We're hoping that anyway. So then Hikianalia, what kind of rig do you think she is? Does everybody give up? Okay, so if we very good. Right. Good, Patrick. It is a schooner rig from Western, and what I've just told you about always looking at the mast to define the type of rig. But that's about the only place that you can say that Hikianalia is, in Western conversations, a schooner. However, everything else on her is totally different. She has what's called curved booms. You can call them wish booms if you want. A lot of people that call them crab claw because of the sail itself, looks like a crab. But she can also fly two headsails if we need to. I think you're right, Ben. Yeah, she's been set up both ways. And I'm talking about when we're having the curved booms on. A lot of times we'll go out sailing, and if we're going to have a lot of work going to weather, we will put more of a Western style rig up in which we have triangle sails on the main mast and on the mizzen mast, and they're more general like a triangle is. It just makes it a little bit easier to go to weather. However, when we're off the wind, the crab claws are hard to beat. Does everybody understand on the wind and off the wind? So if the wind is ahead of the beam of the boat, that's considered on the wind. If the wind is aft of the beam of the boat, that's considered off the wind, right?
Bob, Steve here. Both the main and the mizzen, like Hiki, are they the same height or are they different on Hoku?
Well, I don't want anybody to get out a ruler, but they're awfully close to the same height, right?
Okay.
They're very close to the same height. They're probably going to be changed this next major dry dock coming up. I guess it's in June, Bruce said. I thought it was going to be in May, but that doesn't matter. So we may change the masts. And I know is a little bit concerned, those of you who have seen the spar, which the sail is attached to, versus the height of the mast. There's quite a bit of spar above the mast that's unsupported. And when you get in a pretty good wind, that spar tends to bend over quite a bit. And it can be unnerving if you're not used to seeing it. And it can be unnerving if you're the one that has to fix it all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the height of the mast. So we're going to give more support to the spar. But I think they're still going to be the same height. We're going to raise both of them, I think, about 3 feet from what Naino and I were talking about. So, but again, you're looking at the mast, not the spar, and that's another big difference that I neglected to talk about, is that Hikianalia has 2 masts, and then she also has 2 spars that the sails are attached to. I think most everyone on this webinar today have helped in changing sails, or at least putting the spar up with the sail up or taking the sail off. So again, Hikianalia has masts in plural, and she has spars in plural. I don't want you to be confused, and when you get on to Hikianalia, that I may call the mast the spar, I may call the spar the mast. To me, on Hikianalia, those 2 terms are interchangeable. I'll try not to do that, and I apologize right now to the world if I do that. Old dog, new tricks kind of situation. But I will try to keep it to the mast so that you who will be sailing on both boats will understand the mast is what all the shrouds and all the stays go to, and the spar on Hokulea is the attachment point for the sail itself. Okay, any questions? Further comments on that? I mean,
That's what I was hoping for, Bob. That's good.
okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so what does chasing, this is another question that came up. What does chasing Hoku look like from a sailing standpoint, and how different is the sail plan between the two va'a? Very, very good question. Good, Jen. Thank you. This is a picture of what it looks like being on Hikianalia and escorting Hokulea. We generally will not get any further forward than this. When we're escorting, we want the escort boat, of course, behind Hokulea so that in the event that something happens, we do not have to turn around and go back and get something or get someone. We want to be able to come down onto that unfortunate person if they were to fall overboard or whatever else went overboard so that we can retrieve it much easier, right? We really don't want to be much closer than this when we are escorting, not towing, we're just escorting. And in fact, when we went to New Zealand, God, I can't remember the year now. I guess it was 13 or 14 maybe. We escorted from Samoa, Tonga, and then on to Aotearoa. And at times, we may have been 5 or 6 miles apart. But I always tried to keep Hokulea, Hikianalia to weather of Hokulea and behind her, so that in an emergency, it would be far easier for us to fall off the wind, that is, have the wind come further behind us and catch up with Hokulea rather than have to turn around and come back and get her. I'm sure everybody can see that, right? Let's see how different is the sail plan between the two va'a. When we are escorting, the Hokulea will tell us the sail plan, and that is part and parcel of being escort. What I have done is I will still have non-instrument navigators on board, and they will be isolated, for lack of a better word, from any information from Hokulea on what her course is, what they're doing, and so that the apprentice navigators on Hikianalia can have the same opportunity as the people on Hokulea. What I ask the people on Hikianalia to do is write down a diary or something so that I can go over it to make sure you're just not following Hokulea. Does that make sense to everybody? Obviously, it's not the same, but it really does help from the people that have done it, that at least they get the idea of, okay, I've got to look at the stars, I have to look at the seas, I have to do everything that a navigator on Hokulea is doing, but I'm doing that independent, right? So this is a picture, God, I don't know where this may have been going to New Zealand. This is a picture of Hikianalia towing Hokulea. And Jen, there's a picture, I believe, of us picking up the tow. Yeah, that's it. So maybe we can start there. So this, we're throwing the tow line, or they're throwing the tow line to us. And this is the closest we ever want to get to Hokulea if you're on Hikianalia. If we were doing this at sea and there was a strong seaway or a strong wind, what Hokulea would do is she would drop her tow line with a buoy on one end of the tow line, and if it's at night, she will have glow sticks so that Hikianalia, the escort boat, can see it, and we would come up and we would then pick up the tow line. In terms of how we are going to do that, the jury's still out on that. We have some good ideas. I think they're going to work, but I'm going to reserve saying that's the way we're going to do it until we actually get out and do it. And that's another reason Hiki is coming out, hopefully this week, so that we can get the mechanics squared away, we can put her back in the water, and then we can start practicing this, picking up the tow line, things like that, right? That's very calm. Yeah, it's real calm water, so we could get real close. You're right. Thank you. And it's far easier if you can do it this way. In fact, we've gone so far as we've made a huge boat hook. I swear it's got to be 12 feet long, so that we can go ahead and pick up the tow line from Hokulea when we're in a seaway. It's not fun at all. You want to stay as far away from the two va'a as we possibly can, so we don't have any kissing of the boats. Now we can go back to the tow. Sorry. Oh, so Hoku drops the tow line, and Hiki has to secure. Yes. So Hokulea, for the most part, and again, the jury's still out, the way it has been done, and I'm sure we'll do it the same way in terms of this portion, is that Hokulea carries the tow line, and she lets the tow line out because she can't maneuver, right? She has no motors, and so she drops the tow line out. The tow line will drift away from Hokulea, and then it's our job to pick it up and secure it and not have it in our propellers. That is a big concern for us now that we have the big props. So I believe this was going to New Zealand. And we towed Hokulea, I think, for a day and a half. And you can see that the way we towed her is we just put it on the back of the starboard ama. And we towed very slowly. One of the problems, and this was substantiated, is that we just didn't have enough motor power to tow at any given speed. You can see that the seas are almost nil, and there was no wind, very little wind, and so we could tow under these circumstances. We decided in Aotearoa, or before, I believe, that Hiki just didn't have large enough engines to be able to tow Hokulea around the world. And that's the main reason that Hiki came home from Aotearoa rather than continuing around the world. Yeah, we did tow tests in Tahiti as well. And when the boat got back here, we increased the electric motor size, believe it or not. It still wasn't adequate enough. It really wasn't adequate enough. So the reason that we're going to the new diesel engines that most all of you know about. So any other questions on that one? Yeah, it was so slow. Yeah, it was. It's very slow. Okay, this is a picture, I believe, and Kelly, if I'm wrong, please chime in here. This is a picture of the towboat that was off Swains Islands when we went to Samoa. The problem at Swains Island, there was no anchorage. And so what we had to do is we had to come up close, a boat would come out, put part of the crew on a little aluminum skiff, run them through this reef, which was like a slalom course. I'm glad I didn't have to take anybody through there and drive it. But this big boat that you see here would come alongside, it would pick up our tow line and Hokulea's tow line and tow us away from Swains Island. Then we'd drop the tow line, we'd stay out there, and then the next day we'd either sail back for the most part, or sometimes I believe the towboat would have to come back out and get us, and we'd come back close in, and we would just sail off of Swains Island. We could not anchor. So just wanted to give you an idea of the size of the boats. When we went through the Panama Canal, we had a huge steel something. I think it was a crew boat. It must have been 120, 130 feet long. And of course, their idea is you just bang into the dock and we're here. Well, that doesn't work very well when you're on Hokulea or when you're on Hikianalia. So we had to be very careful that we had a billion fenders out to make sure, because we're not going to retrain their crew. And so just to give you an idea of what types of things we were up against when we didn't have a regular towboat. Yeah. Questions on that? Let's see. What does chasing look like? Sailing plan, and how different is the sail plan between? Okay, so the sail plan's the same, and what I have done when towing is I've actually had sails, very light wind sails like you're seeing in this picture, up so that we're kind of motor sailing, if that makes sense. We'll take advantage of any type of wind that we have. If you look in the very low end of the picture, you can see that the seas look awfully flat, not much swells, and we're able to fly a fairly big spinnaker. And because the spinnaker is on the center of the boat, I can tell you that the wind is probably a beam reach or a little bit forward of beam, so it's not behind us at all. If it were behind us, the spinnaker would be squared off to the two amas, right? So we're also flying a jib in this picture. That white sail is a jib, and the spinnaker is far enough away from the boat so that we're not robbing wind from the spinnaker by using that jib. So this is a type of motor sailing, and I've done it a couple of times in towing. You just have to have a crew that's really, really on it, because your first and foremost responsibility is to make sure you're towing on course. And then your second responsibility is to make sure these sails stay set, right? But you can really cut down on the amount of fuel that you're using if you do this. Really makes a big difference. So let's see. As a guitar player, what is the music like on the Va? I don't know if I gave Jen that picture. We were in the Chesapeake, and Kaipo was on board, and so I don't.
He was doing a Bob Dylan, wasn't he, with the harmonica and the guitar?
Yeah, I think Kelly sent you all those pictures.
Yeah, pretty
great
cool.
Time. We had a great time. The type of music on board, it depends on who gets out the songbook. We have a huge songbook of Hawaiian songs on board, and some of them are Western songs that have been Hawaiianized. If you have the old man here on board, like Mike said, yeah, you'll probably hear some Grateful Dead and some other items like that. But for the most part, it's what people want to hear. So, and if we know the song. So,
well, Bob, Mike suggested you had actually backed up Jerry in the day.
Well, I backed him up in Golden Gate Park.
Well, there you go.
Well, there's a lot of people that backed him up, and we're not even going to go there, Steve.
Most of them don't even remember it, Bob, though. At least you remember.
I can barely remember it. So did I just say that? I don't know. Okay, so yeah, so music, and then can you bring your own guitar? Depends on how many people want to bring their own guitars. You have a limited amount of space for your gear. We do have a guitar on board. A lot of people bring ukulele because they're a lot smaller. But let's see, going down California coast, actually, Mark bought a guitar, I think in San Diego. We got to have him finish the song for Hikianalia. Really, really good song, really good melody. Jen's laughing because she remembers it. And so, yeah, it really saves your sanity when you can get together and just have a sing-along. We used to call them hootenannies, but I guess that's a term that nobody uses anymore. So yeah, start practicing. Please don't ask to bring a piano. I don't know if a saxophone would fit. I don't know if Lehu ever brought her violin. She's a very good violinist, by the way, if none of you knew that. So I've never seen her play the violin on board, but absolutely, yeah. Harmonicas are good. Harmonicas are real good. So